Hello, my fellow strawmen, and welcome back to the Fields of Hay. Today we'll be talking about another one of the answers in Genesis' so-called creation scientist, Jason Lisle. You shouldn't expect much in the way of science out of people who have an unfalsifiable belief in God, and Jason is going to demonstrate why.
Having been reared in a Christian home, I'm very grateful for that. I loved the Lord and I wanted to serve Him. And so it was only a matter of time that I would end up reading a book that had evolution in it. And I could remember it was a dinosaur book. I was very young, loved dinosaurs, what little boy doesn't? And I'm reading this book on dinosaurs and it talked about how one kind evolved into another. And I remember thinking, well, that's not right, because I'd read Genesis and I knew that the Lord created certain kinds of organisms. And I remember asking my dad about that. I remember, first of all, being kind of angry at the book, what's going on, or confused. And then I asked my dad about it, and he said, well, he gave me very good advice. He said, well, we don't believe that. He said, we believe what the Bible teaches. It's just that simple.
I had a similar childhood as Jason, being raised in a Christian household. But I had a different reaction when I was exposed to evolution than he did. We both saw the same contradictions between a literal interpretation of the Bible and the evolutionary record. Clearly, at least one of them had to be wrong. Where Jason and I differed is how he went about telling which was true. I looked for physical evidence and found plenty in the form of nested genetic relationships and the geographic distribution of living organisms. Evolution could back up the claims it made, while the Bible was only able to reassert them over and over again. And I found the former more convincing. I still stuck with a more metaphorical interpretation of the Bible for a while, but young Earth creationism was off the table for me. On the other hand, Jason asked his dad and found that reasserting the Bible was sufficient. The Bible says the Bible says, so the Bible says. What I find really disappointing about this answer is that although Jason can keep saying it to himself to reinforce his beliefs, he can never use it to convince others. I want to know why I should believe the teachings of the Bible, and until I get a real reason, the Bible teaching that I should believe it just isn't convincing. If anything, I find it to be below the reasoning of a supposed God, and is evidence against its divinity.
And I remember being very angry at the book for having lied to me, because I loved science, and it was depressing for me and irritating to pick up a book that is supposed to excite me and teach about God's creation. And instead it was telling me a story, a fictional story, as if it were true. It made me very angry, and then I wanted to throw the book away.
Oh, the irony of this statement. Jason, evolution didn't lie to you. Science didn't lie to you. You just had bad reasons for believing the Bible, and it led you to some false conclusions.
There was a movie a few years ago, National Treasure, where Nicolas Cage finds a secret code on the back of the Declaration of Independence. And it leads him to other clues and so on. And obviously the code was put there by very intelligent people, and that it implies intelligence when you find a code like that. What if there were a code embedded in numbers?
I want you to remember this line. Later on, we'll be looking for a code within numbers, some sort of secret message like in National Treasure.
Numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4. What if there was a secret code embedded in them that we finally got around to discovering? What would that imply? What if there was a message inside numbers? What would that imply? It would tell us something about the intelligence of the person who made numbers.
See, I'm not making a straw man. Jason also calls it a message. He doesn't mean a pattern, he means a message. Please don't forget this. We wouldn't want the goalpost to shift now, would we?
God's sovereign over the abstract just as much as he is the physical universe. And as a matter of fact, there is a secret code built into numbers.
So that's the challenge. A message from the divine, a code within reality itself. Something unexplainable by natural mechanisms, a miracle. Not just some beautiful pattern, right? Now Jason is going to explain the Mandelbrot set, and he takes a while to build up to it given his audience. I do encourage you to watch the full video, but it's an hour-long lecture and I don't want my video to be so long. I'm trimming out the stuff that I'm not here to argue about, and he gives a perfectly good explanation of the math, so go watch it if you're interested in the full context. But for now, I'm skipping to the bits I can sink my teeth into.
The interesting thing is we can zoom in on this because we can have the computer plot it at higher resolution, and we find that this shape has some really interesting mathematical properties to it. You notice that that top circle there, it's got a circle on top of it, another one on top of it on smaller and smaller scales, and it goes out and forms this little tree, and it's got three stems to it, including the trunk. So it's got a trunk and two stems for a total of 3 branches. You see that there? Now the next one to the left branches into 5. Can you see that? I mean, it's kind of small, but you can see the 5 branches there. The next one is 7, 9, 11, 13, 15. It's all the odd numbers. And by the way, they don't stop. They go to infinity. There's an infinite number of them. They get smaller and smaller, though, and so you have to zoom in more. So somehow the Mandelbrot set knows how to count. It's kind of remarkable.
The Mandelbrot and related sets are defined by the initial equation. That equation describes a relationship between two terms in an infinite series, which can be applied with any of an infinite number of constant parameters. I would expect an infinite pattern. The arithmetic series that pops up is interesting, sure, but it doesn't strike me as a code. Nor do I think it's fair to say that the Mandelbrot set knows anything about this series. It feels like Lisle is smuggling in this assumption that some being must have the capacity of understanding to know the infinities of this set.
And then on the other side, you have the odds and the evens. You have all the numbers there in terms of the number of branches. Now, it's remarkable enough that they have branches at all, because who would have thought that when you run numbers through that little formula, you get that shape? It's remarkable. Nobody was expecting that. And it's even more remarkable that it has the ability, apparently, to count in terms of the number of tendrils that grow off of each bud there. And of course, you can take two of those numbers, like 5 and 3. Now, 5 plus 3 is 8, okay? And it turns out that the bud in between those two has 8 tendrils. Interesting. And that's true of all of them, both on the left side and the right. The bud in between the two adds the number of tendrils on each one. So not only does the Mandelbrot set know how to count, it knows how to add.
It doesn't surprise me that there are things we find in nature which nobody expected. It isn't miraculous to me that I don't know why the Mandelbrot set has the beautiful patterns that it does. So yes, these patterns are there, but a pattern is not a code. It isn't a message.
To anticipate my conclusion in this, I'm going to suggest to you that this shape tells us something about the way God thinks. God's understanding is infinite. Numbers are an aspect of God's mind. God is responsible for numbers. And so it makes sense in the Christian worldview that when we explore and study numbers, we find intelligence in them. We find evidence of patterns. And not only intelligence, but infinite intelligence, because this thing repeats infinitely.
I would certainly never claim that math is incompatible with a Christian worldview. I certainly don't see anything in the Mandelbrot set which would preclude a God. But Lisle is acting like this is evidence of God, when it is also perfectly compatible with a natural worldview. But he never explains why intelligence must be responsible for the infinite detail of the set. Why is the relationship described by the initial equation not sufficient?
What does all this mean? We got these wonderful shapes, and it's very pretty, Dr. Lisle, but who cares? Well, I want to ask, what causes the beauty in fractals? Because I think you'd agree they're beautiful. They're beautiful, and they're certainly complex, and so I have to ask what causes the complexity in them.
I think that our human judgments, in combination with the intricate self-repeating patterns, causes the beauty. As for the complexity, I think that the fractal nature of the set is explained by the fractal nature of the defining equation. The first term in the series is to the second, as the second is to the third. Why would it be so impossible for this to give rise to a pattern which has self-reflective layers going all the way down?
So let's answer the first one first. What causes the beauty in fractals? And I'll have several possibilities. Could it be the man-made color scheme?
No. The colors are defined by rules about how long it takes for the series to blow up. It isn't determined by man.
Is it, did the computer create the beauty?
No, I would only say that the computer calculated the part of the Mandelbrot set that we get to see. The physical representation of the set was created by the computer, but the set itself is more conceptual.
Did people make this?
No. They gave a description of the relationship that leads to the set and helped compute the representations of it that we see.
I would say the beauty is built into math. It is. It's always been there. It wasn't until the 1980s that we had the ability to view it.
I would actually agree here. It is just built into the math, and when math is used to describe a consistent relationship between subsequent terms in an infinite series, I don't see why we need a god to explain the resulting fractal. The beauty we see in it is added by us, subjectively.
What causes the complexity in fractals? These intricate shapes that can add and they can count and so on. What causes all that complexity? And the fact that it's infinitely complex. You have an infinite number of baby versions built in to the original. What's causing that?
The Mandelbrot set is defined on the complex numbers, and while they can be unintuitive, it helps to understand that they describe cyclic processes. In the defining equation, you can think of squaring a number as rotating and stretching it on the complex plane, and then adding the c value as translating some distance in a particular direction. When we check to see whether a given point will go to infinity, we are repeating these actions of rotate, stretch, and slide over and over and over again. Is it really so surprising that the results come out as spirals within spirals within spirals?
Did the formula create it? Well, in a sense, we had to run the numbers through that formula to reveal that shape. But the fact is, when we changed the formula, what happened? We still got beauty, right? So it doesn't matter too much what formula. Not all formulas will reveal fractals, but my point is, a lot of them will.
It isn't so much the specific equation that leads to complexity, it's the infinite repetition of the relationship described by the formula. There are certain numbers which meet the description, and this will happen for many different equations. So long as the defining feature involves transforming the points an infinite number of times, it wouldn't surprise me to see such fractal complexity appear.
In a sense, the complexity is built into math itself.
Sure, math can account for the complexity. So long as math can be accounted for naturally, all is good.
So how do we make sense of that? How do we make sense of beauty and complexity being built into math? What is math?
Math is a description we give to quantities of things we find within reality, and the relationships between those things.
Well, math's the study of the relationship between numbers, right? The rules governing how numbers relate to each other. That's pretty easy. And then I'm going to ask, what are numbers?
Numbers are what we use to measure the quantity of things.
The best I've been able to find, and different dictionaries disagree, but the best definition I've been able to find is that numbers are a concept of quantity.
Sure, I can agree to that.
So numbers are concepts. Concepts exist in a mind. Numbers are abstract in nature. They're not physical. They exist in the mind. You can't physically touch a number. You can't literally see a number, by the way. You might say, well, wait a minute, I see the number 3 there. Is that really the number 3? If it is, then I just destroyed the number 3. And poor students will now have to count 1, 2, 4, and so on, because you said that was 3 and I removed it, so there's no more 3. Well, obviously that's not the number 3, that's a representation of the number 3, right? It's a written numeral. Numerals are not numbers, they're representation of numbers. And at some point in history, we decided that shape would represent 3 things. And of course, you can use Roman numerals if you like, and they have a different notation. They represent the same concept, though, don't they? So the concept, that's not something we created. Laws of mathematics are conceptual, not physical. You can't stub your toe on a law of mathematics.
Numbers may be conceptual, but the veracity of a mathematical statement is still wholly dependent on the relationship it physically describes. Take 2 + 2 = 4. Even if a universe existed without any minds present, without anyone at all to conceive of the concept of 2-ness or 4-ness, it would still be true that a pair of things coming together with another pair of things would form a quadruplet of things. Math just gives us a framework to understand which statements are true, even without a physical analog for some particular equation.
So where do laws of math come from? And of course, this is the question that gets back to origins, right? Because the secularists try to explain everything naturally, and especially by evolutionary processes.
This is ridiculous. Things which change over time can be said to evolve, and populations of living organisms which change over time can be said to evolve in the biological sense. But evolution does not apply to all of nature. Nobody thinks that physics or math evolved.
Pythagoras, right? He wasn't the first to discover, but the Pythagorean theorem, right? Now, did triangles not add up that way before Pythagoras? Well, of course they did. He just discovered it.
What Pythagoras discovered was something about the nature of reality. He may have used math to describe his findings, but it was about reality. What I don't understand is why some consistent nature of the universe, describable by such math, can't have existed naturally. Why is there a need for a god to explain the relationships we find between the various bits of existent reality? Let me take a moment to remind everyone of the beginning when the goalpost was laid out, that math should contain a code, a message of some kind. Are the fundamental relationships described by mathematical law such a code? What about the patterns in the infinite Mandelbrot set? What message are these things sending?
The planets, the way the planets orbit, they obey mathematical laws. Kepler's laws, p squared equals a cubed in terms of the relationship. Was that not true before people came along? Planets orbited perfectly well for the 2 days before people.
I think that one of the intrinsic properties of matter is that it is attracted to other bits of matter, and that this attraction dies off over distance. Turns out that this relationship between bits of matter can be described, and its consequences reasoned out to discover the elliptical orbits planets would make. Or more accurate descriptions can be made about how this relationship is really a stretching of space-time, and more accurate predictions made. But all the laws of nature we see are simply consequences of how certain bits of stuff interact with other bits. There are consistent patterns to those interactions, and the laws result from those patterns. So even if there are no intelligent agents to describe these laws, nature can still act according to the underlying patterns and result in something consistent with those unspoken laws.
Do laws of math come from the universe? Some people have argued that. They say, well, math just describes the way the universe is. Now, that's interesting, that the universe does obey mathematical principles. But math can't come from the universe for a number of reasons. First of all, the universe is constantly changing.
So what? That means that the description of the present would constantly change, but there'd be no reason to change the mathematical rules we use to make those descriptions.
It's expanding, and stars explode every now and then, and so on and so forth. Animals live and die, and so on. If math was contingent upon a changing universe, you'd expect math would be changing, wouldn't you?
No, not at all. It sounds absurd, honestly. What would an exploding star have to do with the truth of 2 + 2 = 4? If an animal lives and dies, does that change how we should handle exponents? Does probability change when the universe expands? It's utter nonsense to think that math should change just because we define math based on the universe around us.
And frankly, some math goes beyond the universe. The universe has 3 dimensions of space, 1 of time. In mathematics, you can have as many dimensions as you want. You can talk about the hypervolume of a hypersphere, a sphere that's in 4 dimensions, the 4-dimensional equivalent of a sphere. And that's meaningful, and yet it has no application in the physical universe.
Jason has this shit-eating grin on his face as he says something absolutely false. The correct thing to say is that it has no physical application that he is aware of. For example, large language models often use incredibly high dimensional space in order to store information about the meaning of a word or phrase. It wouldn't surprise me in the least if the hypervolume of this hyperspace had something to do with the memory capacity of the AIs. If the math is esoteric, sometimes that just means that the physical analog to reality isn't obvious. It doesn't mean that there isn't one.
Math goes beyond the physical universe. You can do stuff with infinities in mathematics. All calculus is based on that. Stuff in the real universe, apparently the number of atoms is finite, at least in the visible universe. So it didn't come from the universe.
The infinities example is a better argument than his hypersphere example, but even here, math can come out of a description of various idealizations of the universe, or out of potential ideas of how the universe could be. Because math is both conceptual and descriptive, real math can be based off of hypothetical assumptions, and the consequences of those assumptions understood, even if they don't have a physical analog in reality.
Laws of math are conceptual. They exist in a mind. They are universal, meaning they apply everywhere. They're invariant, meaning they don't change with time. And they're exceptionless. It's not like 2 + 2 = 4 most of the time, but every now and then it equals 7. They're exceptionless, right? And if you think about it, all those characteristics make sense in the Christian worldview, where mathematics is a reflection of the way God thinks about numbers.
Once again, I'll emphasize that I wouldn't use math to try to argue against God's existence. But Jason is trying to use math to preclude a completely natural reality, and I don't see why the properties he lists out are incompatible to my worldview. I can just say that reality is intrinsically consistent, and math is the natural result of intelligent creatures like ourselves describing the world they find themselves in.
But if you think about it, none of those properties of laws of mathematics would make sense in a secular or naturalistic worldview. Or how could you even know? I mean, somebody might suppose, well, I think laws of math are universal, but how could you possibly know that? Everybody assumes it. I guarantee you, all astronomers, at least all the ones I've ever met in my career, all believe that mathematics works the same way in the Andromeda Galaxy as it works here on Earth.
Do you think that maybe the fact that we see the same spectral lines coming off the Andromeda Galaxy as we see from stars in our own galaxy, that it's a good piece of evidence that physics and math is a universal thing? I may not pretend to know why nature has such universal consistency, but it's perfectly reasonable for me to think that it does, when all the evidence I have is in line with my expectations.
All mathematicians assume that laws of mathematics are the same tomorrow as they were yesterday. That makes sense in the Christian worldview, and yet it makes no sense in a secular worldview why there should even be laws of mathematics, let alone why they do not change with time.
This is such a shallow statement for Lisle to make. He makes no attempt to explain why nature shouldn't be universally consistent, just expresses his own indoctrinated incredulity that it could be. It doesn't matter that I don't know what makes nature this way, because I'm not pretending to have access to knowledge I can't know. I'm just a human born onto this big rock we call Earth, and I know just as little as Jason does about the underlying nature of our universe. Unlike him, I don't pretend to know. If Jason or anyone in his camp wants to prove me wrong, they are welcome to explain what about math precludes atheism. But if all they have is incredulity and assertions, then they have nothing.
The naturalist has a dilemma, however, because laws of mathematics are conceptual. They exist in a mind. We know that. Something's a concept that exists in the mind. And so 2 plus 2 equals 4, that's a concept.
It may be conceptual, but that is consistent with my worldview. I believe that before any mathematical descriptions of reality existed, the universe still acted according to consistent patterns. Some of the universe ended up in the right pattern to spark life, some of which evolved to have minds capable of creating the concepts of math to describe the consistent nature of reality around them. What's the problem with that?
Why do fractals occur both in math, which exists in the mind, it's conceptual, and in the physical world, which is made up of atoms and does not exist in your mind?
Because the relationships that get described in math sometimes do occur in the real world. Fractals happen whenever there is a similar rule governing action across different scales. With a lightning bolt, a side branch may have less current than the main branch, but the electrons are following the electric field according to the same rules, and so the branches look like different sizes of the same thing. Or when living things create fractals like ferns or broccoli, it may help to remember that life is generally built out of little self-copying machines. Having a plant be made of the same part over and over again isn't too surprising.
Now, one answer to this, and a skeptic might say this, is, well, the physical universe obeys mathematical laws.
Yeah, but it's a poor way to word it. It's more that the universe is intrinsically self-consistent, and this allows it to be described by mathematical laws. And even though I don't know why the universe would be this way rather than some chaotic mess, I'm willing to accept it as a necessary truth because at some level something just has to exist in a self-consistent way. And I don't know why it couldn't be something as fundamental as reality itself. I don't know why we would need to throw it out as insufficient to explain math and turn to God instead, when God comes with all the same questions about why he exists and is capable of sustaining reality.
So it stands to reason if something can occur in math, it can occur in the physical world because the physical world obeys math.
No. This is why I didn't like the wording of obeying math. Math is limited by our ability to make accurate axioms from which to build. If we come up with bad axioms, we can still do consistent math, but it does not mean that we will find that reality matches it. It only looks that way when we make good axioms because of how closely math models what reality physically does. But reality is not following some set of laws prescriptively. It isn't obeying math.
But I submit the secular worldview cannot answer that. They can't explain the properties of laws of mathematics, why they are conceptual, universal, abstract, invariant, exceptionless, and why the physical universe is compelled to obey them. Why would a physical universe obey conceptual laws? You come up with something in your mind, does the universe automatically just obey it? Of course not.
So first thing, I'm in agreement that thinking of some concept doesn't force the universe to behave that way. That part of Jason's argument is perfectly consistent with my worldview. Second, Jason makes many bold statements about how things can't be explained under my worldview. I think I've done a fair job answering these already, but if you disagree with what I've said, then that only gets you so far as not knowing whether math could have these properties naturally. It doesn't get you to the opposite claim, that you know math's properties to be unexplainable by natural means, and so a god must be evoked. There is still a burden of proof there, which Jason hasn't even attempted to show. All he gives is incredulity in his own assertions of impossibility. I know he's been accepting that standard of evidence since he was a child, but I learned a long time ago to grow up. Asserting something over and over again does not make it a fact, and Lyle's assertion that math is contradictory to natural explanation is no exception.
Some brilliant people have written on this topic. Dr. Eugene Wigner, who is a PhD physicist, I believe he's a Nobel Prize winner, brilliant man. He wrote a wonderful article years ago, I love this article, called The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Natural Sciences. Interesting. Now, he's coming at it from a secular perspective. And from a secular perspective, he's perplexed. It's unreasonable that mathematics should work so wonderfully in explaining the physical universe, mathematics being abstract, the physical universe being physical. And so he discusses this in the paper. This perplexing dilemma is, why does the universe obey math? He says it's difficult to avoid the impression that a miracle confronts us here, or the two miracles of the existence of laws of nature and of the human mind's capacity to define them. He's saying it's amazing, first of all, that the universe obeys mathematical laws. That in itself is astonishing. And what's even more astonishing is that human beings can discover those laws. That's remarkable, almost like a miracle.
It is remarkable, but just because it is outside of our sphere to fully comprehend why the universe can be described by math does not make it a miracle. When I see something that I don't understand, I don't jump to the conclusion that the thing is outside of the realm of natural explanation, and that it's a miracle proving God. A miracle to me is something that goes against natural law, like a coded message in the fabric of reality. To reduce miracles to anything less, to accept a lower standard, is to guarantee that I will witness something which isn't a sign from God and falsely attribute it to the divine? Is it not clear to see how poorly that could end, how easily I could hurt someone around me acting out on those false beliefs?
What is his conclusion? Does he come up with an answer? From a secular perspective, here is his conclusion. The miracle of the appropriateness of the language of mathematics for the formulation of laws of physics is a wonderful gift which we neither understand nor deserve. Isn't that interesting? There is no answer from the bankrupt evolutionary atheistic camp as to why the physical universe obeys mathematical laws.
Even though I disagree with it, let me grant everything in Wigner's conclusion. Let's say that we don't understand nor deserve math. So what? That doesn't carry the burden of proof that math is beyond natural explanation. It just means that humanity hasn't accessed that knowledge yet. At least I can provide more than just assertions for the things I believe. I can point to my argument device as to why I believe there is no God. I can point to the microwave background and the expanding cosmos to support my belief in the Big Bang. I can explain how infinitesimally unlikely it is for organisms to be related in a pattern of nested clades unless evolution is true, and guess what relationships we find them in. Even if I've made a mistake, at least I can say that I'm trying to have good reasons behind my beliefs. But Jason only has assertions. If he thinks I'm bankrupt in my worldview, then he is enslaved to his.
The secular worldview cannot cogently account for the existence and properties of numbers and mathematical relationships, mathematical truths. It can't make sense of it. It doesn't make sense in their worldview. The secular worldview can't answer it. The secular worldview cannot account why the physical universe obeys mathematical laws. It really can't.
See, it's just a whole bunch of assertions. Every reason he gives around these quotes I'm clipping is a straw man of my worldview, usually involving some projection from his. He tries to show my worldview contradictory by holding me to his own poor standards. And then he wraps up with some advertisements for some of his other work, and of course I'm not interested in showing those, except for the one that completely exposes him for the charlatan he is.
Understanding Genesis, how to apply this presuppositional approach to understanding the Bible, understanding Genesis, discerning truth, how to spot logical fallacies in arguments that evolutionists commit.
I mean, wow. Presupposition is a logical fallacy, and probably the one that I have the least respect for. It's worse than faith. Presupposition is when your entire argument boils down to assuming that you're right. Anyone who uses presupposition as a serious argument should be ashamed of themselves and do some serious introspection to try to be better. And should a presuppositionalist ever try to sell you their work on how to spot logical fallacies, you can heartily laugh in their face. Oh, and then there's this one.
Dinosaurs in the Bible, that's a great topic, especially for youngsters. You really want to get your youngsters hooked into the Bible and get them thinking biblically. Use dinosaurs.
I don't have to worry about hooking children on science or teaching them about the Big Bang and evolution when they're young and easy to indoctrinate. No, I have honest conversations with adults who should be capable of basic reasoning. I don't worry about my beliefs being scrutinized because I think they are true and that truth has nothing to fear. Christians like Jason often worry about their children growing up without belief in the Bible, and I think that to some degree it's because they know their beliefs don't hold up to scrutiny. Gotta get them young while they're still willing to accept dumb reasons like,
We don't believe that. We believe what the Bible teaches. It's just that simple.
Papa Lyle may have only approved of reading to help improve biblical discernment, but I say that as long as it's a topic you find meaningful, just go read a fucking book.